It's a very warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of the Daily Debate. You're in the company of myself, Angie Meher, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by our guest, Dr. Milad Momtaz, our international relations expert, who will be telling us much more about President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's visit to China. Dr. Milad, thank you very much, sir, for your time and for coming in this evening on the Daily Debate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And of course, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived on Tuesday in Beijing on the start of a state visit to China to meet with the Chinese president as well as several other Arab leaders in the China-Arab summit that is expected to be held tomorrow. This is a very important visit by President al-Sisi to China. And just to wrap up the latest developments with regards to the visit, we have a quick report on the president's activities so far during his state visit to China. So let's take a look at this report and we'll be back for more and an in-depth discussion with our guest this evening. Stay tuned.
Chinese President Xi Jinping held an official welcome ceremony for President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi outside Beijing's Great Hall of the People on Wednesday. During their meeting, the two leaders discussed means of foster bilateral ties in various domains, in addition to a number of regional and international issues of mutual concern, at top of which is the war in Gaza and means of regaining stability in the region. Xi told President al-Sisi that the current round of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict had caused a large number of innocent Palestinian civilian casualties, and the humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely severe, adding that China was deeply pained. He said the top priority task now was an immediate ceasefire in order to avoid spillover of conflict, impact on regional peace and stability, and so as to prevent a more serious humanitarian crisis. The Chinese leader said China appreciates the important role played by Egypt in cooling down the escalated situation and delivering humanitarian relief into the besieged enclave. Xi expressed China's readiness to work with Egypt to continue to assist the people of Gaza and push for an early, comprehensive, just and lasting settlement of the Palestinian cause. Meanwhile, the two leaders witnessed the signing of a number of deals and memoranda of understanding in various fields, which were signed by Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. During the visit, President al-Sisi is slated to hold a meeting with the heads of a number of giant Chinese companies over attracting investments in Egypt. He will also attend the inaugural session of the 10th ministerial meeting of the China-Arab States Forum, which will be held on Thursday, bringing together the Chinese president and a number of Arab leaders. The forum is aimed at reaching consensus between China and Arab countries and is scheduled to adopt a number of outcome documents which will further plan cooperation in the next stage and make a common voice of China and Arab states on the Palestinian cause.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, still with you and our edition of the Daily Debate. And of course, upon an invitation from the Chinese President, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is in China on an official state visit that kicked off on Tuesday. Now, let me start, Dr. Milad, by asking you, how do you see, the importance of such a visit? Egyptian-Chinese relations go back and have evolved throughout the last few decades. Could you tell us a bit about the Egyptian-Chinese relations overview?
Quickly, I believe that the relations are very crucial, not only to Egypt, by the way, it's very crucial to China itself. Dating back, if we go back in time, we travel back in time, we start, from 1950s and 1960s onwards. 1950s and 1960s, I believe that was a very important turning point in the relations between these two major powers.
Right.
Why? Because these two major powers were emerging back then in these 2 decades. And I think closeness between these two countries, I think, was very evident back then, 1950s and 1960s. By the way, Egypt was the first Arab and African country to recognize China and the new regime in 1956. On the other hand, the same year, China had done something which is very remarkable to Egypt, because that year witnessed the tripartite aggression by France, Britain, and Israel on Egypt. China had done something, as I said, very important, which is They provided us with an economic aid with more than $4 million. And by the standards, economic standards back then, that was a huge sum.
Quite a huge sum, indeed.
Okay, moving onwards, 1960s, there was, of course, a very important movement internationally recognized as the non-alignment movement. And
yes.
Egypt, of course, was one of the leading countries in that movement. On the other hand, China was another leading one in the non-alignment movement, because the world back then was a truly multi-polar system, unlike the situation later on after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So Egypt and China largely contributed to that movement in 1960s. 70s, that was a turning point in the relations between Egypt and China, because the compass of our foreign relations changed in 1970s towards the West. Mostly in 1960s and 1970s, it was eastwardly. Okay, 1970s toward the east, you know, because of the Camp David and the relations between Egypt and Israel and the peace accord. Okay, back then it wasn't really high tide between. Okay, I'm talking about the relations between Egypt and China. From 1980s onwards, there were sincere, I wouldn't say something other than this, sincere attempts by the Egyptian regime to restore the relations between these two very important countries. However, it wasn't simple, it wasn't easy. And I would say that the last 10 years, the last decade, witnessed the real change in the relations between these two major powers. For different reasons. I believe myself that the Egyptian leadership, I'm talking about politically speaking, they realize how important to have diversification in our international relations and not to rely solely on one power. From day one, I think 1914, that was clear-cut. So they started, okay, I'm talking about namely, of course, President Abdel Fattah Sisi, to seek that kind of balance in our foreign policy. And one important and heavyweight player is China.
Right.
So they started 1914, and by the way, there was a summit back then in 1914, and they signed some really important agreement in Beijing. It was like a strategic partnership between Egypt and China.
In 2014.
In 2014, nearly 2014.
Yes,
so it's been 10 years now since we started that kind of partnership, and we are actually, exerting more and more efforts to make that kind of closeness more beneficial, more practical, and more balanced at the same time.
And more of a win-win relationship between the two countries. So as you said, it's been 10 years since the elevation of ties between Egypt and China to a strategic partnership. What does this mean, strategic partnership?
Okay, so simply speaking, in politics, when we describe that kind of elevated, as you said, high-level partnership between two powers, we actually move from regular partnership like, for example, trade, ties or relations between two countries, which is, I don't underestimate this, because by default it's very important as well. But strategically speaking, we move to next step. Next step like in what? For example, like militarily speaking. Okay, that's very crucial. And most importantly, in my mind, is about the situations regarding international crisis or international issues like the one mentioned in the report.
Right. Dr. Milad, we will take a very short break and we'll be back to continue our discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, a short break and we'll be back for more. Just stay tuned.